Welcome. Today, in the latest of our deep dives into the reinvention of the actuarial profession, we're going to be looking at how actuarial science can help change the world for the better in the very biggest sense. Today, I'm joined by IFOA President Suee Chieh and Matthew Edwards of Willis Towers Watson, a leading participant in the COVID-19 Actuaries Response Group, to discuss the concept of grey swans, helping the world foresee the otherwise unforeseeable. Suee Chieh, Matthew, as we record this podcast, we're still very much grappling with the outbreak of COVID-19. Tell us a little about how the profession contributed to response to that outbreak.
Excuse me. Thanks very much, Gareth. So it's obviously been a very strange year and a great example of grey swans, which are things which, you know, they're not black swans, they're not completely unforeseeable, but clearly taken everyone by surprise. So the way things went, thinking through the timeline last year in January, so exactly 12 months ago, really, from when we were recording this. In January, we were sort of seeing what was going on over in the Far East, and I think we were all hoping it would be rather like SARS was back in 2003, sort of confined, managed away, and it wouldn't affect us. And clearly things didn't work out like that. So another month later, February, things were starting to go bad. I've got a lot of Italian connections. I used to work in Italy, and my wife's Italian, so I was following the Italian situation in Lombardia very closely, and that was actually going very badly. It seemed to be very clear that things were going to be the same over here with a few weeks of delay if nothing happened. So towards the end of February, various of us started sort of getting our heads together in sort of initially two sort of parallel streams, I suppose. So I was sort of trying to agitate with various people within the IFOA structure and some of the various committees to get things moving to take some form of sort of fast official response, and that didn't really go anywhere, perhaps for reasons we could discuss later. And then at the same time, Stuart MacDonald was in touch with Suee to try and work out what we could do outside. And so between us, we sort of quickly realised we needed to sort of go for the external, outside the formal IFOA governance approach. So we formed early March the COVID-19 Actuaries Response Group. So we all sort of reached out to people we knew to be experts in this area across a range of disciplines. So if you like traditional actuarial, mortality and longevity specialists, those with a more epidemiological bent, and if you like classic epidemiologists and doctors, and if you like catastrophists as well. So got a great bunch of people together, very dedicated to trying to work out what we could do with a culture which was much more around sort of quick active response, taking a view, sticking our neck out, because clearly at the time there's little information. We couldn't sort of spend a year having a big working party to sort of assess everything in a nice way. We had to sort of take stock of what we knew at the time and just work from that. So that was March, and then to in April, I think the IFOA moving towards the establishment of the ICAT under Colin Duckovitz, which is now starting to produce huge numbers of different papers on various aspects across, I think, possibly 85 different work streams, but the number might be slightly different. And then following, also we were doing various other things in other parts of the profession. So I'm also wearing a CMI hat. So within the CMI, the continuous mortality investigation part of the profession, within the mortality projections committee, we started doing excess weekly deaths monitoring to try and help people to work out what was going on, because the official reported COVID-19 stats weren't really reliable at the time. So the best way of measuring the impact seemed to be to compare with previous year's mortality. And so we're just doing a sort of straight Asian gender adjusted comparison against 2019 for simplicity. So that was very well received, to try and work out what was going on in the early months. And we're still going on with that, although we're looking to sort of decelerate a bit next year. And then also within the CMI, we started the COVID-19 working party to try and think through many of the implications, again, from a slightly narrow mortality and health perspective. So we've been doing lots of stuff in different ways, and I think clearly many people have found it useful. So that's been my sort of recollection, really, of the first few months of last year.
Wow, it's a pretty intense few months by the sounds of it. Suee Chieh, same question to you, really.
I would offer a consistent but slightly different perspective. I think IFOA and the profession, anchored in the UK, responded admirably and very impressively as a whole. Yeah, because we got to think of it in these terms, right? The pandemic is raging across the world, but we were able to marshal, however we marshal it, yeah, because the Actuaries response group is still part of IFOA, yeah, the members are. We have used our skill sets, yeah, in a very imaginative way to educate. We're just looking up our website, right? To educate, to learn, to share, to educate, and influence. And I think that members of the IFOA are all very proud that the ARG Actuary Response Group was able to shape, to influence, and to appear in Wall Street Journal, to be in Tim Hartford's more or less program, and one of the members, Stuart McDonald, one of the co-founders, was named the program's favorite actuary, and it was received so many positive comments throughout the world, right? And they get invited, and also the analytics for the LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, I was looking up today, about 5,500 followers. Twitter about 10,000 followers, which are remarkable. Yeah. So the quality, and it's still on a sustained basis, and I'm still part of the WhatsApp group. The energy, the commitment, the enthusiasm is still undiminished after 9 months, 10 months. And the quality and the speed and the regulatory is winning a lot of admiration. Yeah. And I'm going to make quite a lot of reference to it in my presidential update next Tuesday. But the quality of the publications coming out from IFOA, the formal structure, are equally good, right? The longevity bulletins, the CMI reports, and a lot of guidance on the practice. And they're designed to produce more erudite and more considered positions. So they can't move with the same speed, right? But the complementarity, I think we should celebrate that, the complementary of that. And I think there are things we can learn from ARG, what are the best practices, because I'm familiar with it, because I was associated with them early on, about getting the right people in a group. They are almost like a tribe. Yeah? It's not to a formal process that they came together. So I thought that was good. So if you think about it, and we can talk about that, right? We are good in analysis, right? But how do we bring our public interest to bear? And how do we elevate our influence? Yeah. So I think that ARG, and together with ICAT, has done in the last 10 months a remarkable job. And then the number of volunteers participating in different groups, in different hospital groups, are laudable. And I just got an email that we got one of our article being published in a serious journal, right? Through SAGE and through ONS, which are government bodies. So on the whole, I see that this experience has provided us with an opportunity for us to demonstrate, to bring our thought leadership, our ability to articulate our opinions to bear. So I think looking back, the last 10 months has been remarkable in that sense.
Mm. Yes, I echo the theme. It's sort of a great complementarity of styles. So the C19 ARG started off quick, doing sort of, what we could do quickly, and as you say, it was, if you like, not erudite in the sense of long duration considered stuff, but then the ICAT and then the longevity bulletin, which I'm also involved with then sort of looking after the more considered, slower, more sort of formal aspects. I think it's been a great combination of those different styles.
Thank you, Matthew. And staying with this, I guess you've covered this to a degree, but what do you think the profession as a whole did well, and where could it perhaps have contributed more?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, the profession, it almost depends on how you define the profession. So I see the profession, in its essence, is the collection of actuaries, as opposed to the sort of the paid officialdom, which obviously is an important part. So not to belittle that, but the profession, in the sense of the collection of actuaries, I think has been incredible, the way we've all pulled together in our different ways, whether it's through the ARG, through people joining the ICAT as that became publicised, through the CMI or the longevity bulletin. A couple of actuaries whose names unfortunately escape me because I'm very bad at remembering names, then also organised, if you like, sort of a volunteering effort, and hundreds of actuaries then sort of joined in that just to support local GPs with the data analysis and other such, simpler sounding but equally essential aspects. So the profession, in the sense of actuaries as professional individuals with a sense of duty to the common good, I think it's been an amazing response, and I'm very proud to have been able to be part of that. That's been very good. I think the profession, as the organisation, clearly as all organisations are, it was to some extent rather slow to start off with, but that's a clear consequence of its governance, which is largely created for different problems in different times, with sort of slow moving considerations, and many of our problems are we're trying to look forward for 50 years time, so there's less of a sense of urgency. But I think we're sort of now coping with that, and as we've gone through the list of different activities, many of those activities are, if you like, formal IFOA, CMI, Mortality Research Steering Committee efforts. So that's all been good. I think we sort of achieved a good result by the end of the year.
Thank you. Do you think we could have been, I say we as in the actuarial profession rather than the IFOA, could have been called upon to do more, or could have contributed in a different way? Or do you think by sort of January 2021, when we're recording this, we've managed to find ways to contribute to all the different spheres that we could have done?
I think what we did well was the use of social media. I think it was, I said it earlier, but I think that one we really did well, right? In Twitter and LinkedIn in particular. And it's not just the ARG, but the other groups are also beginning to respond. I think we should develop that as a skill. What I thought we could do better was about the rhythm of opening and closing. And I'm not as close to this as the people in ARG and ICAT is. And the political, IFOA is anchored in the UK, it's anchored. So when we talk about profession, it's largely the profession as centered in the UK and in the countries where we have groups of actuaries. Our debates on that one was less clear to me, about the opening and closing up, because I think it's complicated. And the implications for us as actuaries in what I call the larger world thinking, right? So it's not just about the pandemic and its consequences on the various industries. What does it mean in terms of our and so forth? Because clearly our tools of identifying risk needs to be thought through again, right? Of which pandemics just suddenly appear, right? So I think that part, I think that debate will have to continue. We'll have to continue. So that would be my take as to what we could do more of. Yeah.
I think the point about the whole sort of opening up and closing down is a very good point. And I suppose looking with hindsight, what we could have done more of, and I'm just as guilty of this as everybody else for not having thought about it more and made more of a noise. Was thinking through the various options available to governments and trying to sort of think through more of a longer term perspective. Because if you look at what the actuarial profession does, which others can't, I think we've got a unique position to be able to combine perspective across both the mortality health sort of dimensions and the economic financial dimensions, which clearly this is all about how those two interrelate, but also a sort of mindset which is all about thinking into the future, both short term and medium term and long term. And clearly looking back, I guess back in March, April, we were very much around looking through the short term mortality impacts, trying to make it clear to everybody that we were faced with this potentially sort of could have been easily a 1% infection fatality rate, which could translate into 500,000 UK deaths. So back of envelope calculations were sort of very much in line with the sort of the Imperial College modelling, and making sure everyone was clear on that from our messaging. But then that sort of, I suppose, got stuck in a bit of a rut on that, and maybe also guilty of a bit of groupthink, because as the government response was moving from allowing that mortality catastrophe to happen to effectively replacing it with a bit of an economic catastrophe, I think we could have been doing much more to think through the longer term impacts of lockdown, whether there's other ways to have a more focused degree of lockdown, looking at particular groups. So again, at no point have been sort of lamenting our lack of thinking about that in the past. I suppose the lesson is more thinking through what might be happening this year in terms of trying to see whether we can help optimize the relaxation of lockdown in the UK to avoid this sort of blanket approach. It does seem to me that blanket lockdown is a form of sort of nuclear weapon, which you want to have as a weapon of last resort. And we haven't really had a proper discussion about the alternatives, given that we as actuaries can, deploy our minds hopefully in a way which combines the longer term thoughts as well as the shorter term and the economic and financial consequences of lockdown, as opposed to the mortality benefits in the very short term. I suppose you could say the one data point we acquired back in sort of August, September was that lockdowns don't do anything other than delay and defer problems, which is a good thing if there's something you can do at the end of lockdown. And I guess in the UK we're in the happy position, almost happy position, being able to have the vaccine rollout to be the answer. But back in August, September, October, we seem to be sort of wallowing a bit in lack of any consideration of sensible options. But rather than lamenting that, it's more sort of thinking through, what's the lessons for some of the next problems, such as climate risk, and can we sort of be doing more to sort of make sure we're thinking through some of those different avenues, economic versus, or economic combined with health, as opposed to just one or the other, medium and longer term impacts, not just short term. And what can we do to avoid groupthink and also to avoid sort of polarization? I think one of the sort of stranger things about the pandemic has been a very polarized or sort of dichotomized way of thinking, especially if you sort of go and look at Twitter, which is always a bit unnerving. So where obviously the nature of the Twitter debates with a very sort of limited number of characters per Twitter post, everything has been very sort of binary and this or that, very much a dichotomy, and doesn't really allow any form of nuances to, COVID-19 is a significant mortality thing, but on the other hand, are there alternatives to lockdown, as opposed to being all this or all the other? So it would be good to try and sort of use our different perspectives better to try and find more sort of, I suppose, focused solutions and try and avoid the sense of polarization and groupthink.
Well, sticking with that subject, my next question is, what are the other key global issues beyond COVID-19? As difficult it is to think beyond COVID-19 sometimes, do you think the profession could or should be playing a larger role in?
I'll come in on that, Gareth. I think the framing is really important, because I've talked to such a diverse groups of actuaries over the last few years I'm on council, and different people have very different take about our role. Clearly we got roles in our jobs. Whether and to what extent do we articulate what we call the public interest role needs to be framed properly. Because when I talk about global issues, we could get carried away. But I think that one way to frame it is to ask ourselves, we have a public interest role that is in our charter, but how does it express, how should we express it, right? In a way where we are involved in a meaningful and a consequential way, and we can add value, So if you think in those terms, actuaries are about risk management, risk management. I think there is no debate about that. Risk management means that you must create systems which are sustainable. Anything which is not sustainable, then it's an issue. But actuaries also deal with probability and statistics and mortality. And those are sources of uncertainty which you can quantify. But lately, we have been swamped by uncertainties which our models cannot capture. And there's a technical term for it. It's called Knightian, named after Frank Knight, Knightian uncertainty, where you cannot reduce it to probability. And I suspect all our tools today were a result of actuaries reflecting on this, right? Reflecting on this, and then they came up with tools. But now we need new tools or new narratives to capture uncertainties which appear very different because of globalization, because of networks, because of digitalization. Because somebody did something in Wuhan, I don't know what that person did, but the whole world is in a crisis for 12 months, right? You know what I mean? It's just a butterfly effect going through the whole world, right? So actuaries have a legitimate interest as part of their capability, duty, and area of interest if they are risk managers, which we are, right? So we are not just doing the costing of mortality. So if that is the context, climate risk is clearly an obvious one because the Bank of England, which is our regulator, the FRC, the Malaysian National Bank, MAS in Singapore, and even the Chinese authorities are asking financial institutions to take into account climate risk. So that is actually mandated. The debate was actually 3 or 4 years ago, should we be more active in advocating that? And as you know, the Council has approved in November, just less than 6 weeks ago, support for the Paris Agreement and also committing to net zero emissions by 2030 and so forth, which is a very significant step for our council to take. So climate risk, but if you go into the heart of the matter, where most of our actuaries are working in health insurance, retirement, and life insurance. And that is about economic security, health security, and income security. You put in those terms, right? And clearly, are the people we serve, right? As a public interest, is that are the products they are getting securing their future, pensions, life insurance, health insurance, yeah. Because that's where we work, right? So if we are not, so I think those are the big things, right? So the great risk transfer is a very specific, not specific, actually it's quite a major manifestation about how regulations have evolved over the last 30, 40 years, where it encourages financial institutions not to take on risk, but to pass on risk to people who doesn't know how to manage risk, so that they could protect their balance sheet. Is that the right answer? I do not know. So there are a lot of problems or issues to solve. Yeah. So if I put it, climate risk is one of them, clearly. So then it comes to great risk transfer, income security, health security, pension security. We've got lots of things to do because it's not just about mathematical skills, it's about how financial products, the opacity of products, the cost effectiveness of products are designed, and we are at the heart of it. So if you think of global issues to solve, these are really things we can solve. There are other global issues where we have no capability. The China-Russia, the China-US conflict. I mean, we don't have a capability on that one. But this one, we have a capability, but the system, the problem is not just actual skills, right? It's actually systemic. It's actually it's a financial system doing the job it ought to do. Yeah, the narrative has changed, right? The narrative has changed as to whether it's doing, and such questions are being asked, not by some radical left wing. Not there's anything wrong with left wing, but it's in Financial Times. All the articles are being asked: is the financial system rewarding people appropriately? Are risks being measured properly? Are risks being measured? Because currently the way we measure risk is on 1 year standard deviation of stock prices. Clearly, as a long term, we actually should be taught. So I think for us, there is an opportunity for us to take part and maybe participate, and if possible, influence the conversation. If possible, influence the conversation. So I think there are many big issues at the same time. So that one is at a much more meta level. At the lower level, there are still Solvency II issues to solve. There are still pricing issues in general insurance to solve, or equity release mortgages and so forth. So there are many things for us to address. Yeah, if we take our purpose, our public interest seriously, and we should do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Suee. Matthew, what's your view?
Yes, it's a very tricky question. I mean, because also clearly by nature of the way that life works, there's life in the general sense, not life insurance. There's actually almost an infinite number of future problems and challenges. We could be helping with, I guess, going back to one of my early points, if we can look at things which combine both the sort of the health, mortality, longevity aspects and financial economic aspects, which clearly most major things do, and varying different sort of future time horizons. That's clearly areas where we can add a lot of value. So climate risk, for instance, I mean, the one that's been more in my mind recently is around artificial intelligence. What can be going wrong with that, and not just what can be going wrong with that, but what given given what we have be applied more beneficially across society or societies in the plural. And that's a good example. I suppose the other point maybe is trying to, although clearly we're sort of, number of people and very much into quantification, trying to be more aware of things which aren't easily quantified, and almost goes back to some of the early points Chieh about uncertainty and being able to accept there are many areas we can't quantify with particular uncertainty, but also maybe more awareness of where there are aspects which are almost by definition not quantifiable. So I remember writing when I was editor of the Actuary many years ago, doing an editorial on ethics and actuaries. I mean, ethics is a good example of something which is an essential thing to take account of, which we generally, to a large extent, ignore as actuaries because it's not quantifiable. But it clearly has massive implications for many of the things we do think about. So in the context of the pandemic, for instance, there's massive ethical considerations in terms of, sort of lockdown being a sort of clear a blanket approach where you're sort of effectively sort of operating on the whole society in order to protect a smaller subset from the very material risk. And likewise, I think there's some ethical considerations for many of the AI questions, particularly around privacy. And in fact, just having just revamped our own COVID-19 ARG website, it's quite frightening to see how much information you can track about the users, which I hope doesn't put people off from visiting our website, because it's nothing too frightening. So it does seem to me that there's more to be done on the allowing for those qualitative aspects and trying not to be too obsessed with the numbers. And I think one of the drawbacks of looking at risk from the Solvency II perspective, which has become for insurers, has become a bit of a sort of default view. It's Solvency II has, to my mind, become too much about calculating numbers to satisfy regulators without allowing it to actually properly improve your longer term risk management. So in a way, it's actually been, I think, counterproductive for longer term risk management. That's probably a minority view, but I think clearly there's a huge numbers of things we can be helping with, and one of the problems, I suppose, is the fact that so many actuaries are just very busy with their day jobs. And one of the strains we've had over the 2020 has obviously been freeing up the time to do all this sort of stuff for the common good, in addition to trying to keep our day jobs running.
Yeah. I mean, that draws on my next question really, which was, what lessons should we learn from the pandemic about how to maximise the positive impact that the profession can have when helping plan for and respond to these globally important events? I mean, having the time to do it is one, but there are other factors.
I will build on what Matthew said, about Solvency II and doing a calculation. I think we just got to step back a bit, because I think we were exercising our judgment much more, say 30 years ago, because Solvency II and all the calculations came in maybe in the last 15 years after the financial crisis and after the Morris Review, where we had gone into more prescriptive type management. But we just could ask a question, a much bigger question: what's going on? Right? Because we could be too busy doing all the calculations, right? But what's going on? What are the other risks, right? I just stepping back, I think we need to exercise that kind of judgment a bit more. But about what lessons to draw from the pandemic, and I think that I want to draw on sort of three words from Greek literature. Logos, ethos, and pathos. So I think we actuaries are very good in logos, which is about analysis and logical arguments. And that is our strength. We must never lose that, because that qualifies us to be people of substance. But we must also bear in mind that for us to be consequential, we must be able to assert our authority, and sometimes we are a bit shy. And then the last one is the ability to influence and engage people in an emotional sense, so logos, ethos, pathos, and I think that Reddington said, right, about imagination. We should maintain our accuracy and cautiousness, but we should also create more space for imagination. I think that is really important, because some of the problems we are solving is no longer systematic problems. The problem is the system, not something within the system. The system is a problem. Then you need a very systemic mindset. So I think that is important. I like the way Matthew talked about ethics, yeah, which is very much at the heart of what our profession, and I like to say the British profession, is about, because it's one of our pillars of strength. And I listened to one of our senior leaders. Yeah, I don't really know her. I met her once over a drink. I think her name is Sally Bridgeland, right? Sally Bridgeland. I think I get her right. She was speaking at a webinar, Hoffman Center for Sustainability. Yeah, and she talked about uh, us. I think she go into a logos space and into the humility space as well. So, and that's important. Although we've got a lot of strengths, we don't overplay it, right? So he says that we sometimes we have all the answers, we have all the questions, but actually what we want to do is to be able to listen, because some of the problems we have are actually is in a shared conversation. But we need to do more of that. How do we listen and integrate, right? And that is not something which an analytical and a mathematical mindset is necessarily good at, because we are always going for the right theoretical answer. But generally, we've got to look at it much more looser and allow a greater diversity of approach. So I listened to some senior risk professionals. One of them was Neil Cantle, and he was speaking, and he talked about words which I resonate with me. He talked about multi-threaded narratives and about looking at networks of what could go wrong. And you can't really model it, you know. So if this could go wrong, what are our protective steps, right? Of course, you can do that as an advisory to the firm. But what we could go wrong now actually is a system, you know, that what happened in pandemic, right? In COVID-19 is no longer a firm. It's actually the world is something going wrong. And it was, I'm 61 years old. I don't think that in the last 60 years has there been a globally felt VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity, which is global. We had the Vietnam War, the fall of Berlin Wall, but those were fairly local. Yeah? But this is global, right? Seriously global. And that came on the back of the bushfires in Australia and droughts in Indonesia, locusts, swarms in Africa, and the melting of polar caps. So it's a period of heightened uncertainty, right? And we are supposed to be experts in uncertainty, and we need to go back. We need to go back to our DNA and say, so given that this uncertainty, so where is our resource to solve this, right? It's no longer a normal distribution or a Cauchy distribution, right? Somehow we need to come up with some sense of toolkit. And I've seen some good papers written on it, right? On uncertainty and biases, but those are less familiar for actuaries. But I think that in our history, we got people who can do that. I was very taken by a paper written by, it's a working party paper, but I can recall Andrew Smith, Martin White, and a few other actuaries' names. It was called Managing Uncertainty. And it were a lot of steps about communication, listening, and checking whether you have frame the problem wrongly, yeah? And things like that. So it's actually back to basics, right? And sometimes you think that back to basics is not important, but it could be some of the things we need to do as a profession and as a body. And we are not really the one first out of the block insisting on it. There's sufficient literature and commentary in wider society about this, right? And I think that my sense is that we should participate in it and not be so inward-looking and concerned. Yeah, just put our toe in the water and participate in the debate. Yeah.
Matthew, coming to you, what lessons should we draw from the pandemic and the response to it?
Yeah, I suppose we touched on some of these, as I think Suee's answer was very good, and many of those points. I suppose looking back and again trying to draw lessons from the last 12 months in a sort of a positive sense. I think basically the quick reaction aspect is is essential, and which means we need to be prepared to act with limited information, make the most sense we can of situations, and then there's a whole sort of communication aspect. So I think the use of social media has been very useful, in the way we sort of our bulletins were sort of fairly short and 3 or 4 page type things with as clear as possible with clear views. It was a sort of, I think, a very good way to go, as opposed to sort of much longer, blander pieces. I suppose an interesting lesson to me is it the pandemic itself. Start off as if like your classical pandemic with a spread of a virus with a significant mortality impact, and I guess we all started with the mindset of that being the problem, and then to my mind that every few months the sort of problem changes. I think we brought this out in the longevity bulletin we published at the end of last year about some of those many different sort of phases of the problem, and needing to be prepared to sort of almost start from scratch every couple of months with a new set of problems. So to my mind, again, sort of going back to one of the earlier themes, that the problem to some extent transferred from how do you cope with a pandemic in a purely biological sense to sort of what are all the implications of lockdown, what are the sort of various different ways you could have sort of focused responses, non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs being one of the new acronyms we've all learned over the last year. And now there's a very interesting new set of problems about how to optimize vaccination rollout. So within the ARG, we've just done a posting on that, supporting the 1 dose as opposed to 2 dose strategy for the sake of time and speed. So the next few months are going to be all about vaccination, some optimization, and that then aligns with how to optimize the relaxation of lockdown, because again, I think we've been a bit too short term across all the different groups I've been involved with, and got a bit stuck back into our sort of actuarial rut of just looking at deaths last week or what might happen next week, as opposed to the longer term considerations, because in the longer term, health and mortality is paid for by the economy, whether it's a state or an individual level. And if you sort of wreck the economy, clearly you're wrecking the future provision of health service. So we sort of need to think through ways to optimize the response for vaccination and relaxation from lockdown, and get the economy rolling for the sake of not so much future pound notes per se, but future investment in health and getting back onto an even keel with the health service. So there's a bit of a sort of, maybe that's a bit too much of a ramble, but it does seem to me we've learned some good lessons about needing to sort of refresh our thinking every couple of weeks, every couple of months. What's the next problem? How can we think about it? How can we not just stick into our comfort zone of deaths and R and so on, and how can we be longer term? And I think also being more prepared to challenge prevailing groupthink and not to be too afraid of criticising whatever the sort of, if you like, orthodoxy might be.
Absolutely. So a bit of a challenging question next. If grey swans are by definition foreseeable, though obviously not perfectly predictable, why do we keep having these problems?
Yeah, it's a funny question, isn't it? I mean, it's right. I think the Queen answered, I guess, a bit of the UK people listening to this podcast may remember. I think the Queen asked something very similar to all the economists back in after the financial crash of the previous decade. Why didn't everyone see this coming? Because clearly it must be on your sort of risk register. I'm not sure she used those precise words. And likewise, pandemics are clearly foreseeable as a concept, because as a life insurer, as a life insurance of consultant, I mean, all of our clients, we spend quite a bit of time working on putting up the capital for these events and then thinking through how you'd quantify them and so on and so forth. So, grey swan versus black swan, just in case people aren't aware, black swan is something which is, almost qualitatively unpredictable. The unknown. Grey swan is sort of a lighter version of that, as you might guess from the name. So it's sort of not completely unpredictable, but as we've seen over the last year, still takes you by surprise when it comes along. And I suppose, to my mind, it's the answer may be more almost a rehash of what Chieh was saying earlier. It's all about dependencies. I think that the thing which really took everyone by surprise here was the extraordinary network of dependencies we've got in the system. So something which, again, all of the sort of the life insurance pandemic modelers had sort of had in a nice little catastrophe risk compartment in their sort of mental frameworks, then sort of turned into something which sort of crossed all areas into obviously into market risk due to the economic implications of lockdown, and operational risk and resilience due to everyone working from home, and then also maybe sort of almost conduct risk implications. What happens if you're trying to sell business but you're doing it from your home on your laptop, and so on and so forth. So there's that question of dependencies, and again, I think Suee mentioned Neil Cantle, and he's been a great proponent of work around Bayesian networks, which are becoming more and more, if you like, trending, with particular reference to operational risk, but also you could be using them in pretty much any risk area. And the idea there is to, again, try and get away from this idea of having a model to produce a number to satisfy the regulators, more having a model, a sort of a process map, if you like, to help work through, if A happens, what might happen then, what are the impacts on B and C, what are the dependencies, and trying to think through things in more of a qualitative way to help with risk management, as opposed to just calculating an exciting number or an unexciting number. And again, then feeding into risk mitigation from that, as opposed to, again, just having some numbers to support the problem if it transpires. Those are my thoughts on that.
Chieh, what's your take on why do grey swans keep on having such an impact on us if they are to a degree foreseeable?
Well, if you look at the last 10 years, the economic crisis, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, breakdown relationships, I think it can be very fundamental about human nature, right? Our relationship with nature has been one of growth, the emphasis on growth for self-interest, and human beings have self-interest as well as altruistic tendency, but we need to get it blended properly, right? So the exploitation of the planet, I think, is not contentious. It's obvious to see. And globalization, which means that we are very interconnected, right? So you look at, and then the inequality, right? A lot of inequality and poverty and health security issues is also a function of social systems, right? So there are big questions, our relationship with nature and our relationship with one another. Yeah. So at a very philosophical level, that's what is happening, and we are accelerating faster and faster. Therefore, at increasing capacity, increasing frequency, but our human ingenuity is such that we are able to respond with capability, which is not about moral wisdom, but it's about our scientific ability. So we can come up with vaccines in 8 months, right? To come up with vaccines to cure it. So but actually the problem is not scientific. The problem is about how do we create better societal system without over-exploiting the planet and without so much inequality, yeah? And if I replace the word inequality with increased security for all, it will sound less political, right? With increased security for all, which is what our industry is about. Right? So that is to answer your question, right? Over the last few hundred years, or maybe thousands of years. So we have that. So we've got still this issue to solve. Designing a good economic and social system will require us, and it's not just about economics and financial models. I think it's about how we're going to organize society, which is a big subject. Yeah, which is a big subject. But I wanted to touch on why, about the question on why the Queen didn't ask the question in LSE. LSE was my alma mater. She went there in 2009 and asked the question, how come the economists did not see the crisis coming? Yeah? And I wrote an article on this, and I was busy, and I posted this article on LinkedIn a few days ago. Actually, many people foresaw the crisis coming, and I was writing about him, Raju Ragaranam. He was a very senior economist. Norel Nobini, Martin White, Martin Wolf, Kenneth Robert, all saw the crisis coming. But the question is that we won't listen, you see, because we have groupthink and we have vested interest in it. Just like you tell somebody, you should stop smoking. You should stop smoking now because you're going to get cancer. They won't stop until they get cancer, right? So this is what happens. Because the party, when a financial bull market was accelerating up to 2007, 2008, is Chuck Prince from Citibank said that we will never stop dancing, right? Until the music stopped, because everyone's self-interest was invested in it. So we can see it coming. And Bill Gates, in a video 5 years now ago, had a brilliant presentation And he said that if anything is going to kill if there's anything which will kill more than 1 million people or something like that, it will be a pandemic. And it was a great presentation. It's only 10, 12 minutes long. So it is not a black swan. It was in fact, it was a very light gray swan, right, waiting to happen. But when we are in our risk management meeting, in board meetings in insurance companies, we will have a lot of tables on that. And I'm sure pandemic will be itemized, and there will be business continuity planning, divided roles and all that. Yeah? But it never it was never in your foreground. It's in a list. But when it's in a list, it's not, you won't feel immersed. Yeah? And that is the problem, right? That's the problem. So Richard Ruffelt, the author of Good and Bad Strategies, say that you really got to ask, don't get so, the details are important, but you really got to ask one central question. What is going on here? What's going on here? And I think that we got to do a bit more of that. And I think that it's going to be part of a lot of literature and thinking in the coming months and years, because we are just being hit by too many crises at the same time.
Certainly. Well, final question from me. What would be your advice to actuaries who know that they can contribute to these big global issues and are hitting us seemingly in waves, and they're looking for a way to do so? And what's the IFLA's role in boosting their voice?
Okay, there are many levels to that question, because if they're thought leaders and they have things to say, they should publish and organize their pathos and ethos, make their views known. So the Actuary Response Group and another group called Actuaries for Transformational Change, they have views. They got together and they expound their views, and that is to be encouraged. And many have joined the practice boards. And if you've got views to, and actually there is a encouragement for people to create communities and amongst themselves, yeah, digitally, right? Because now you're digital, it's so easy, you get into Zoom. And then you can get followership, because thought leadership is not just about a paper. By definition, you must have followers. Otherwise, you can't call yourself a thought leader. So the whole mechanism is really up to the person. But we have a strong tradition of people who are thought leaders, in writing papers and all that. And I think that it has receded somehow in the background. So we are trying to encourage that to come in the foreground. But there is a more strategic attempt to encourage our practice boards to become more like communities rather than to be a formal board, to be a community board. And we are starting out with two groups, which I know that Graham Stott and Louis are busy leading, data science and banking, to encourage people to start thinking, to build communities within a continent or across the world, right? Especially in domains which are cross-practice, because many of our practice boards are. And also IFOA has now got a blog platform, which you can offer your view, IFOA main page, right? And then you can offer that. So there's that. But for younger actuaries who like to be participate, I think you got to stay curious, and I think having the actuarial mindset and training is really advantageous. There are so many things which are adjacent to us, right? Or in the heart of what we do. Be interested to push a bit further, right? Because epidemiology, and there's so many good articles on the pandemic, right? Climate science, and then Matthew talked about AI and machine learning. There's so many things or genetics or behavioral finance, and all these are going to combine and change the way we do things. And they must have some, okay, you can participate at various levels. If you want to participate at a very influential level, you got to make sure that you are current. And being current is not difficult now because all the knowledge is available on the web. So there's that. But to play other roles, conferences, supporting roles, there must be so many opportunities.
Thank you. And Matthew, final thoughts on you on the subject?
Yeah, just a quick one for me. I think it's sort of a two-way process. So individual actuaries shouldn't expect the IFO is there to sort of do the job entirely for them. There's a huge amount you can do as individuals, whether it's from approaching the groups such as the sort of COVID-19 ARG or some of the other working parties, or just getting your name out there through the blogs or through the Actuary magazine, or just creating your own strong LinkedIn presence and postings and blogs. So it's very much up to individuals to really sort of forge their own path in the IFOA. Sort of organisation is there to help that, but it's, you shouldn't be expecting the IFOA as an organisation to be doing everything for you. It's sort of, it's sort of a marriage of both really to make things work.
Well, thank you. That was an absolutely fascinating discussion. It only really remains for me to thank both of our guests for their time today. Thank our listeners for listening in, and hope you join us next time as we explore how their profession is changing.